What was the fox thinking? Today, I want to take an analytical approach to Kurama as a character and many of the writing choices involving him. We'll cover issues that weekly manga tends to have, as well as literally deep diving the story bits themselves where Kurama has been involved. The point behind this is that Kurama is an antagonistic force that transforms into a force for good across the run of the series. When this is done well, we get characters that turn from hated by the audience to loved unanimously. Spoiler alert for Harry Potter in 3, 2, 1, Professor Snape. This character is reviled by the audience and characters alike until their truth is revealed and changes our minds. Or think of Ebenezer Scrooge and his classic journey through time to change his character for the better. We get to see him humanized through his own history and a complete regeneration of the good he once was. Even in the harsh fiction of A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, where everyone's out to kill each other, the Kingslayer himself goes through a tumultuous growth that transforms him from hated, mocked, and slandered to forgiven and loved for his later actions. But the characters don't have to start out hated, as in the case of Kurama. I don't think us, the audience, necessarily hated the fox inside Naruto. We just knew that Naruto became a badass when the fox's chakra came out. In a way, this was a clever choice to keep the fox hidden. There are very few times before Naruto faces off against Orochimaru at the beginning of Shippuden where we see Kurama as he actually is. All we saw was the titular character using that chakra for good. This is almost like subliminal messaging for the audience, priming us to expect the fox's chakra to be used for good, despite his originally villainous demeanor. And this is where I want to touch on the issues of publishing a story on a weekly basis. Never mind the insane workload this must be for the writer and their team, but there are certain glaring issues with the writing process itself. When someone is writing a novel that takes a year to write, they can at any time go to an earlier chapter to change an event to better align it with something just written. This makes the plot far more fluid and organic for the reader. However, when you take that same story and chunk it up into individually published chapters, the writer can no longer go back and change an inconsistency. Instead, they're forced to either retcon, or usually sloppily, mold their future story to reflect what's happened previously as fact. Retconning, or retroactive continuity, is when a story's rules, laws, characters, or lore are adjusted, ignored, augmented, or just contradicted by future work. A perfect example of this is when we first see Pain's eyes at the end of part 1. In both the manga and the anime, the Rinnegan only has a few rings. This is then changed to the endless rings we all know and love much later on. So how does this apply to Kurama? Naruto took years to finish, and unless you're Ichiro Oda and have your entire story planned out back to front, there are going to be instances that aren't fully thought out. The nine-tailed fox was a force of total evil at first. This is how he was presented to us, as he literally just destroys things whenever he's free from human control. But it's more than 600 chapters later that we finally learn the history of the tailed beasts. In that revelation, we learn not that Kurama is at all evil, simply that he's grown to detest humans. He's tired of their control and doesn't really believe any of them would go out of their way to help a tailed beast. But it's very possible that this was a retcon. Kishimoto's initial plan could have just been that Naruto has an actually evil monster inside of him. But then, as his story gained traction and exploded in popularity, and he realized that he'd be writing such a long story, perhaps he was forced to rethink the fox as a character rather than as an obstacle. This might not be true, but there are a plethora of inconsistencies in this story that would support the argument that Kishimoto didn't have his story fully planned out. That's not a crime to not have your story planned out. It's just that for the sake of Kurama, arguably the other side of that protagonist coin, it's extremely challenging to guess whether Kishimoto had a plan of redemption for him from the very start. So while we have tremendous ups, as most would expect to have from a protagonist, we also have tremendous downs when the antagonistic force that is the fox takes over. Any instance that we have communication between Kurama and Naruto is met mostly by outright hostility. It's either taunting, insulting, or the fox coaxing Naruto into releasing the seal. This is what anyone would expect Kurama to want. Of course he wants to be freed. He might be immortal, but he doesn't want to spend all that time stuck inside humans. So the logical throughput from seeing his jail even once is that Kurama wants nothing less than to escape. But he's not an idiot, so he's not going to bash against the proverbial bars 24/7. Let's establish what Kurama may or may not know. It's possible that tailed beasts don't know that they're immortal. When Rin was forcefully made the host of Isobu, Kakashi was forced to kill her to protect the village, and as we've been told, the beast died with the host. But this is obviously not the case. Tailed beasts never actually die. If their host dies, they diminish and reform over several years to wreak havoc again. However, Kurama hasn't been in very many hosts, and none of them have died while he's been trapped inside them. So another logical deduction for us is that he knows he can live forever in the simple sense of not aging. But he might not realize that even if he were violently ended, he would reform a few years later. Therefore, we can assume that if Kurama thinks he'll die if Naruto dies, then it follows that he'll protect Naruto from otherwise lethal encounters. Because in the beginning, Naruto doesn't seem to have a choice whether the fox's chakra is going to leak out or not. I think it's fair to say Kurama has creative liberty with how much chakra he can release, especially when Naruto's in a heightened emotional state. How a person's emotions can alter the permanence of a high-grade seal is beyond me, but I'm not going to split hairs. A seal meant to lock away a super weapon shouldn't be affected by emotions, as that would make the most unstable environment possible. There are instances such as versus Haku when Kurama releases enough chakra that it becomes visible during a moment of unmitigated rage by Naruto. But the reasons for releasing his chakra should be twinned. It could be that he was doing so to protect Naruto's and therefore his own life. Also, he could be testing the seal for how malleable it is at any given moment. It isn't until much later that Kurama remarks that as he watched Naruto's life journey, he found himself rooting for Naruto more and more, despite initially thinking of him as a snot-nosed brat. But so early in the story, it's hard to believe Kurama has already started rooting for Naruto. At this point, he's still a purely malevolent presence. After all, killing Sasuke would likely be nothing but advantageous for Kurama, given his past experience with another member of the Uchiha, Madara. So powering up Naruto because of the kid's will to avenge Sasuke doesn't exactly line up. I suppose this is a distraction, but why is the seal even weakening? From a narrative point of view, it makes sense, but from a writing standpoint, it's illogical. This specialty seal meant to lock a super weapon away shouldn't loosen after a decade, right? There are interesting cases later, such as during the Konoha Crush when Naruto's fighting Gaara. While I definitely didn't think about it in the moment, much later I wondered why Kurama didn't want to help Naruto in a bid to free Shukaku. Insofar as these tailed beasts not getting along, surely from one slave to the next, Kurama would want at least one of them to be freed. Was it a jealous rage from Gaara allowing Shukaku to fully materialize that drove Kurama to wanting to wake Gaara? There's this second constant occurrence that literally underpins the entire story of how the fox perceives the world. From a writing perspective, this would have been great fun to drop hints of the fox's rage, motives, perception, and interactions with other characters. But Kishimoto doesn't do this at all during the fight, again lending credence to the idea that Kishi didn't have the fox's storyline thought out. So as much as we love Kurama today, his potentially retconned narrative is kind of hard to follow. Sasuke is Naruto's best friend, but Kurama is his closest friend, and we don't get much from him for all of part 1 and most of the first half of Shippuden. Later in Shippuden, when Naruto faces off against Orochimaru, we get a super creepy sequence where Orochimaru is seemingly inside Naruto's subconscious, having a stare down with the fox. Even at this point, we could assume that Kurama is still a ball of pure malice, because there's no conversation between him and Naruto. Naruto gets angry, and the fox takes over for what, the second time ever? I don't really count the time with Deidara, Naruto's clones didn't even dispel, so there was a much more evident battle for control at that time. And the first time occurred during the time skip against Jiraiya, of course. So here becomes the question now, why doesn't the fox just leave? Why does Kurama willingly fight Orochimaru? With Yamato out of range, the fox could have very easily eventually taken full control of Naruto. But instead, he stays to fight Orochimaru. This could have been one of those occurrences where Kurama's anger aligned with Naruto's, so that even if he took control of the body, they both wanted the same thing. Again, without any narrative from the fox, it's unfair to claim to know what he was thinking in these moments. And this is because we get our first instance of Kurama truly, willfully working with Naruto during the fight against Kakuzu. There's a visual representation of this when Naruto's eyes stay blue, but their pupils turn to slits. Or in later cases when he adopts Sage Mode and the fox willfully works with him. It's possible that Kurama is actually impressed by Naruto's successful formulation of the Rasen Shuriken, and so in this moment he volunteers his power to see just how destructive the jutsu is. But maybe he thinks if Naruto gets too close to a dangerous foe, his emotions could fly and the fox could gain more ground. I think if Kishimoto had a concrete plan for a core character like Kurama, we could have had a completely different narrative throughout this story. Imagine a shadowy thought behind everything Naruto says that contradicts him or taunts him. Especially in the visual medium of the manga, you could hide the fox's words in the panel, such that they're visible but hidden in the art. A legitimate haunting on Naruto. And early on in the series, before the seal starts loosening, there'd be no whisperings. Later, as more and more of the fox becomes exposed, his words go from hidden puzzles in the paneling to literally taking over full sentences for Naruto, warping his personality in some cases. And you could conclude this with fading whispers as the fox starts to trust and believe in Naruto. Once they become friends, these whispers change from insults and cruelty to mutterings of agreement and encouragement. And all of this could happen without the story changing a whit. I kind of wish I didn't think of this, because now I wish that had happened. Everyone knows Garfield, right? The big orange cat with an attitude and an affinity for lasagna? Well, there's a spin-off comic called Garfield minus Garfield, where fans go into the comic strip and brush Garfield out of existence. What we're left with is an unhinged John Arbuckle who's so lonely that he's walking around his house talking to himself and suffering from random hijinks without Garfield's snide commentary. In a bit of a dark way, it breathes new hilarity into the scenes. I think what we need is someone with the skills for it to superimpose Kurama's whisperings on top of the already existing manga. Now I'm just talking crazy. I should probably just end the video. I'll be chucking more of the rewrite out on Friday. I just thought I'd throw something else in here to change things up from time to time. Without further ado, the sky's the limit.